Ma'am, for the third time, we do not understand you. The concierge's voice was a tight wire of strained politeness, his eyes darting toward the crowd that was beginning to gather near the marble reception desk of the Royal Grand Hotel. The Japanese woman in the navy blue coat stood motionless, a silent island in a sea of rising panic. Her hands were clasped politely in front of her, but her eyes, sharp and unreadable, scanned the growing tension like a general surveying a battlefield. Behind her, an assistant in a dark suit frantically tapped at his phone. Two in-house translators whispered in the background, red-faced and helpless. "Should we call security?" one staff member muttered. "She's not being aggressive," another whispered back, "but she won't respond to anything in English, French, or Mandarin. And she's booked in the presidential suite, for heaven's sake." From the far end of the lobby, near the gleaming brass luggage carts, Elliot Barnes watched the scene unfold as he methodically polished the edge of a glass table. His gray janitor's uniform was a form of camouflage, designed to make him invisible in a place like this. People didn't see janitors. That was part of the job, especially here, where luxury was measured not just in marble, but in who was allowed to be heard and who was expected to remain silent. The hotel manager, Veronica Hale, descended the grand staircase, not like a manager, but like an actress stepping onto a Broadway stage. Her stilettos clicked sharply on the polished floor, her crimson lipstick a beacon of manufactured control. "Good morning," she said with theatrical calm, placing both hands on the reception counter. "I'm the general manager here. How may we assist you, miss?" The Japanese woman didn't respond. "Miss," Veronica repeated, her voice firmer this time, the smile not quite reaching her eyes. Still nothing. Veronica turned, giving her staff a forced smile that was more of a grimace. "She's refusing to speak. This is unacceptable." The murmurs from the gathering crowd grew louder. From where he stood, Elliot felt the shift in the room's air. It was a change deeper than confusion. It was contempt disguised as customer service, fear masquerading as professionalism. Veronica leaned toward the guest and said slowly, enunciating each word as if addressing a misbehaving child, "This is America, ma'am. If you want service here, you need to speak English." A pause. Then, softly but unmistakably, the woman exhaled, a single, quiet breath. It wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate, measured, and Elliot felt a chill slide down his spine. The assistant stepped forward nervously. "She's not being difficult. She simply prefers to communicate in her native language for formal matters." "Formal?" Veronica laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. "We're not in Tokyo. If she wants to order towels, she can point like everyone else. She's blocking the check-in line." Elliot placed his polishing cloth back on the janitor's cart and began to move slowly toward the commotion. He didn't know why his feet were walking, they just were. Something in the woman's eyes, the quiet, unshakable dignity. He couldn't name it, but he recognized it. It was the look of someone being measured in a currency they had never agreed to use. Veronica waved to a uniformed guard nearby. "Escalate this. I want her removed from the lobby." The woman's assistant stepped between them, alarmed. "Please, she's not being causing any harm. She is one of the most respected executives in Japan. And she's delaying service in a 5-star hotel. We don't have time for guessing games and silent treatment." The woman's hand twitched ever so slightly, then returned to stillness. Her silence was not weakness. It was a blade held steady and waiting. That's when Elliot stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said, his voice quiet but clear. Every head turned. Veronica blinked, her face a mask of annoyance. "Mr. Barnes, this does not concern maintenance." "I know," he said simply. He turned toward the guest, offered a slight bow, almost imperceptible, but just right, and said in soft Japanese, "Okyaku-sama, ocha wa ikaga desu ka?" "Honored guest, would you care for a cup of tea?" Time stopped. The Japanese woman's eyes widened, not with surprise, but with the slow dawning recognition of being truly seen. She replied in quiet, melodious Japanese. Elliot nodded. He gestured toward the lounge. "We can sit there. No pressure, no misunderstanding." The assistant turned toward the staff, stammering, He's speaking with her perfectly, with a Kyoto intonation." Veronica's voice cracked just barely. How do you even know Japanese?" "I don't think that matters right now," Elliot said gently. The Japanese woman, who had held her silence like a shield for 15 agonizing minutes, raised one hand calmly and spoke, her voice for the first time clear and resonant. "I will take you up on your offer." And just like that, the most powerful woman in the room left the marble counter and walked beside a janitor toward the quiet lounge, leaving a stunned silence in their wake, filled with a new, unspoken question. Who is this janitor? And what else has this hotel chosen not to see? Elliot set the delicate porcelain cup on the low table between them, careful not to let it clink. It wasn't just tea. It was a ritual, a quiet ceremony he hadn't performed in nearly a decade. Raina Saito sat across from him, her posture regal, her hands folded gently in her lap. The soft light of the private lounge filtered through the window, casting patterns on the polished floor. "Arigato," she said softly, her eyes lowered. "Thank you." For speaking with intention. Elliot nodded once. "It's been a while. My accent is probably rusted." "No," she replied, finally looking up. "It's not rust. It's memory." And a silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, but suspended, like the breath before music begins. She studied him carefully, her voice now in precise, careful English, touched with a Kyoto lilt. "You learned Japanese formally, Kyoto University," Elliot said. 7 years as a cultural linguistics lecturer, I specialized in East Asian silence dynamics." Raina raised an eyebrow, just slightly. A whisper of a grin touched her lips, there and gone like a ripple on still water. "And now a janitor," she said, not with mockery, but with genuine, piercing curiosity. "Now a janitor," Elliot confirmed. "At least until someone figures out I know more than where the mops are kept." And Raina looked down at her tea. "Why hide?" Elliot leaned back, the old ache settling into his voice. "After my wife passed, I needed a job where no one asked me about my past or my future. Silence isn't always a retreat. Sometimes it's the only honest thing left." NSHE didn't offer empty condolences. She simply listened. "It was the right thing to do. In my country," she said after a moment, "we are taught that the most powerful person in the room is often the one who speaks last." Elliot chuckled, a dry, sad sound. "In this country, the one who speaks loudest usually wins. And that," she said, her voice serious now, "is why I stopped speaking English in business negotiations. The words have become noise, weapons. Negotiation should be about intent, but here, it's about performance." NNHE watched her with something more than interest. It was recognition. He saw her not as a billionaire, but as a human being trying to protect something tender. He knew the feeling. "You're not here to sign a deal," he said finally. "You're here to see who is willing to listen before they speak." NHER eyes met his,
And he knew he was right. "Back in Tokyo," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "An American firm once offered me a partnership." Lavish praise, smooth talkers. But they mocked my accent when they thought I wasn't listening. They didn't realize I understood every word. "No, what did you do?" "No, I terminated the deal," she replied simply, "and donated the technology to a non-profit instead. It cost me millions." She looked him in the eye. "But I slept better." Elliot smiled, not out of amusement, but admiration. He saw the woman she was, not the headline she represented. And in that quiet, sunlit lounge, a janitor and a silent CEO began to build a bridge, not with words, but with the shared, unspoken language of their scars. "I want him removed immediately," Veronica Hale's voice sliced through the hallway outside the executive boardroom like a shard of glass. Her heels struck the marble with clipped, furious precision as she stalked toward the back corridor, the assistant manager trailing behind her. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "the guest, Miss Saito, specifically requested—" "She requested service." Veronica snapped, not even glancing back. She didn't request some glorified janitor in a dusty uniform to perform kabuki theater in our lobby. Inside the boardroom, the hotel's upper management sat frozen. They had just seen the 10-second clip that was now circulating online like wildfire. Elliot Barnes bowing respectfully and Raina Saito accepting his invitation with a quiet grace. The trending title, "The Janitor Who Spoke Her Silence." "Do you know what this makes us look like?" Veronica demanded, slamming her iPad on the table. "We have 3 certified translators on payroll. None of them could connect with her. And then a janitor from maintenance walks up and makes us look like incompetent fools." NNTHE regional director coughed lightly. "Veronica, with respect, it doesn't make us look like fools. It reveals that we already were." NHER jaw tightened. And from the other side of the hotel, Elliot stood alone in front of a vending machine, watching a bottle of green tea drop with a clunk. He didn't hear Raina approach until her voice drifted beside him. "They are still selling Ito NT. I haven't seen that brand outside of Tokyo in years." Elliot smiled, handing her the bottle. "Well, this place likes to look international. Just don't ask if it's refrigerated." Raina accepted the drink with a soft laugh. "Thank you, for earlier. I don't know how else to say it." "You already did." Elliot replied. "And I meant more than just the tea," she said, her eyes meeting his. "You saved me from becoming someone's spectacle." NHE shook his head. "You saved yourself. I just translated the moment." No comfortable pause stretched between them. She glanced out the tall lobby windows, where the city buzzed quietly beyond the glass. "I am used to being underestimated. I even count on it sometimes. But that woman, Veronica, she looked at me like I wasn't even human." Elliot's gaze followed hers. "That's the thing about places like this. Polished surfaces, cold smiles. Everything is about what people think you are until you step outside the script." Raina turned back to him. "And you, Elliot Barnes, you stepped far outside it." "I've been off script for years," he said. A flicker of an old, deep pain crossed his face, a story he rarely told. He saw the question in her eyes and answered it without her needing to ask. "After my wife died, I had to raise my daughter, Charlotte, alone. I left the university, took whatever job I could. I learned that the world only respects knowledge when it comes in a 3-piece suit. A man with a mop is just part of the scenery." NNTHE assistant manager appeared at the end of the hallway, flustered. "Mr. Barnes, Miss Hale would like to speak with you urgently." And Elliot sighed. Of course she would. Raina stepped forward, her voice soft but unshakable. "Mr. Barnes is currently assisting me. If Miss Hale wishes to speak with him, she may schedule it after my meeting is complete." The young man blinked, nodded, and practically sprinted away. Raina looked at Elliot, a hint of amusement in her eyes. "I may not raise my voice," she said, "but I have learned how to raise eyebrows." "That," Elliot said with a genuine grin, "was a master class." Back in the boardroom, Veronica Hale paced like a shark smelling blood. "She's redefining protocol," she hissed. "A guest is not supposed to dictate staffing structure, especially when that staff member is maintenance." NNTHEPR director spoke up cautiously, his eyes on his tablet. "Actually, the footage is already being praised online. The hashtag the janitor who listened is trending. Words like dignity, grace, and cultural sensitivity are attached to our hotel's name for the first time in months. Trending doesn't sign our checks," Veronica spat. "Neither does insulting a billionaire." Someone else muttered from the end of the table. NNSHE ignored him. Meanwhile, Raina and Elliot returned to the lounge, where a tray of traditional Japanese sweets had been discreetly placed on their table by a junior staffer, who clearly wanted to be seen doing the right thing. Elliot offered her a manju, still warm. NNSHE took it, a real smile touching her lips this time. Someone still has pride in their service. NNHE sat across from her again. "You said earlier that words had become weapons," he said, continuing their conversation as if no interruption had occurred. "But I've always believed they can be bridges too." NNSHE nodded. "Only if they are spoken from the right place." "And where?" He leaned forward slightly. "Do yours come from?" Raina blinked, her public composure softening into something more vulnerable. "A place I haven't let many people visit." NNHE held her gaze, his own eyes full of a quiet understanding. "May I be the exception?" A moment passed between them, a silent negotiation of trust. Then, softly, she spoke. "My father was a Buddhist craftsman. He used to say, 'In silence, we remember who we are. In noise, we forget who we were meant to become.'" Elliot exhaled slowly. "That explains a lot. I lost him when I was 21. She continued, her voice dropping. "The day before he passed, he held my hand and said, 'Don't fear being misunderstood. Fear becoming someone who is easy to understand.'" Elliot's throat tightened. "He would have liked you," he said, the words feeling true and heavy. Raina looked away for a beat, a flicker of old grief on her face. Then, without warning, Veronica Hale herself entered the lounge, her face a thundercloud of manufactured authority. "Mr. Barnes," she said sharply, ignoring Raina completely. "I need to speak with you. Now." Elliot stood slowly. "Can it wait? Miss Saito and I were—" "No," Veronica interrupted. "This is a matter of professional boundaries." Nin rose beside him, her 5'4" frame suddenly seeming to tower over the manager. "Excuse me, Miss Hale," she said, her voice dangerously calm. Veronica turned, the fake smile plastered on. "Yes? You are addressing an employee who is currently in a private meeting with me. I suggest you choose your next words very, very carefully." Veronica stiffened. I didn't mean to offend." "You didn't offend," Raina said, her eyes like ice. "You revealed." And with that, she turned back to Elliot. "Shall we continue?" NHE nodded. Veronica stood frozen, her face a war of colors as the janitor and the billionaire walked away, leaving her alone with the ringing silence of her own irrelevance. The photo hit the internet before Elliot even made it back to the janitor's closet. A grainy snapshot taken by a guest on their phone. Raina Saito, seated in the tea lounge, smiling softly as Elliot Barnes poured her tea with the precision of a diplomat. No assistants, no translators, just two people, face to face. And within an hour, the image had over 300,000 shares. The caption that went viral came from the guest who took it. "While managers panicked, a janitor connected. We don't need more executives, we need more Elliots." Veronica Hale slammed her laptop shut so hard the ceramic cup beside it rattled. "Tell me this is being contained," she hissed at the hotel's digital communications lead. NNTHE young woman swallowed hard. "We're trying, but the media's calling. CNN, Nikkei Asia, Good Morning America. They want to interview him." "In him?" Veronica's voice was venomous. "He's a janitor. He hijacked our brand narrative. she seethed, turning to the assistant general manager. He made us look like we failed at basic hospitality, while he stood there polishing glassware and playing cultural savior. He didn't play anything, the assistant said carefully. He just did the right thing. No one hired him to be the right thing, Veronica shouted. We hired him to mop. Elliot stood alone in the staff break room, the buzz of the fluorescent light humming above him. In his hand was a printed email from corporate HR, short, blunt, sterile. Subject: Employee Conduct Review. Mr. Barnes, due to recent public exposure and deviation from assigned duties, a formal internal review has been initiated. Until the matter is resolved, please refrain from further guest interaction. He folded the paper until it was small enough to disappear in his fist. NNTHE door creaked. It was Marcus, the night concierge, one of the few staff who still remembered Elliot from his university days. They're panicking, Marcus said quietly. Veronica's about to lose it, because I spoke Japanese to a guest. Elliot said, his voice flat. No, Marcus replied, his gaze steady. Because you reminded everyone what real service looks like. He lowered his voice. You've got people pulling for you, Elliot. Guests are asking for you by name. Staff are whispering about you like you're some kind of legend. I'm not a legend, Elliot said. I'm a man with a mop who forgot to keep his head down. Or maybe, Marcus countered, you're a man who remembered he still had a voice. And upstairs in the penthouse, Raina sat by the window, her laptop open. Her assistant, Daniel, paced nervously behind her. They've sent a statement, he said, waving his phone, from corporate. They're calling the incident an unfortunate deviation from protocol. They say Mr. Barnes acted outside his station. Norman Raina didn't look up. Norman Rain, do you want me to respond? Daniel asked. NNSHE finally turned, her voice soft but unshakable. No. Her eyes sharpened. I'll respond in person. NSHE closed her laptop, her reflection staring back at her. Not the billionaire, not the figurehead, but the girl who once waited tables in a Kyoto tea house, translating tourists' awkward orders into the graceful phrases her grandmother had taught her. That girl had waited a long time to be heard, and now she was speaking. Elliot returned to the lobby with a mop in his hand and silence in his chest. The chatter in the hotel hadn't stopped. If anything, it had grown louder. But now, when guests turned to look at him, it wasn't with disdain, but with a new kind of curiosity, with respect. He hated it, because he knew how fragile that respect was. Respect built on viral clips and trending hashtags wasn't real. It was applause with a time limit. Veronica met him near the elevators, arms crossed like a general waiting for a soldier to surrender. Mr. Barnes, she said crisply. I trust you've received the notice from HR, and I did. Then you understand the consequences of continued deviation from your assigned duties. And I do. NSHE smiled thinly, a slash of red lipstick in her pale, angry face. Good. Then we won't have any more confusion about roles, will we? NBUT, just as Elliot was about to nod and walk away, to retreat back into the comfortable invisibility he had chosen for himself, a voice echoed behind them, calm and clear as a temple bell. No. We will have clarity, but not the kind you think. They both turned. Raina Saito stood at the far end of the corridor, poised and resolute. She walked toward them, each step deliberate, as if she were stepping onto a stage she owned completely. Miss Saito, Veronica said, her professional mask slipping back into place. We were just discussing the unfortunate misunderstanding from earlier. There was no misunderstanding, Raina interrupted calmly, her eyes fixed on Veronica. Only a failure of character, Veronica blinked. Excuse me, Raina's voice remained steady, a quiet force that seemed to suck the air out of the hallway. You mistook silence for weakness, and you mistook a uniform for a measure of a man's worth. This is an internal staff matter, Veronica stammered, her authority crumbling. Incorrect, Raina said, holding her gaze. This is a matter of human dignity. She then turned to Elliot, the warmth returning to her eyes. Mr. Barnes, would you be so kind as to walk with me? He hesitated, a lifetime of keeping his head down warring with this sudden, unexpected validation. Then he nodded, leaving his mop propped against the wall. As they walked down the hallway side by side, leaving a speechless Veronica in their wake, Raina said quietly, "They can't stand that you didn't beg for credit." Elliot smiled faintly. "Let them stew. I didn't do it for them." "I know," she replied. "That's what makes it so powerful." They walked in silence. But it was the kind of silence that didn't shrink a man. It was the kind that lifted him up. It was nearly midnight when Elliot finally walked through the door of his modest apartment. The kitchen light was on, casting a soft, golden hue over the worn countertop. His 10-year-old daughter Charlotte was asleep on the old blue couch, a book resting on her chest. He smiled, a wave of love so fierce it almost brought him to his knees, washing over him. This was why he did it. This was the only kingdom that mattered. He gently lifted her into his arms, her body light, her breath warm against his neck. As he tucked her into bed, she stirred. "Dad?" she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. "You were on the internet. Lily's mom showed me. You're everywhere." He sighed, sitting on the edge of her bed. "Yeah, that wasn't supposed to happen." He looked up at him, her eyes sharp and intelligent, so much like her mother's. "They're saying you spoke Japanese to a billionaire and saved the hotel. Is that true?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he asked, "Do you remember when I told you that sometimes doing the right thing makes the wrong people angry?" He nodded. "Well," he said, "today was one of those days." Charlotte was quiet for a moment. "Are they going to fire you?" He question, so direct and full of a child's simple fear, hit harder than any HR notice could. "I don't know yet, sweetheart," he said honestly. He leaned her head against his arm. "Why do people get mad when someone's kind?" He stared at the floor, searching for an answer that would make sense to a 10-year-old, to himself. "Because," he said finally, "kindness makes arrogance feel small." Later that night, long after she had fallen back asleep, Elliot sat alone at the kitchen table. He pulled out a sheet of paper and began to write a letter he wasn't sure she would ever need, but that he had to write anyway. "Charlotte," he wrote, his pen scratching in the quiet of the apartment. "One day, you'll be old enough to ask me not just what I did, but why. I want to answer that now, while the memory still stings. Today, I saw a woman being erased with smiles. I've seen that look before. When someone pretends you're not there because acknowledging you would mean they have to treat you like a human being. I stepped forward because I've been on the receiving end of that silence too many times. And if I've learned anything from raising you, it's this. We don't need the world's permission to do what's right. We just need the will to do it anyway." He folded the letter and tucked it into a small envelope marked with her name. One day she would understand He next morning. As he stepped into the janitor's closet, Marcus, the night concierge, caught up with him. "They're meeting right now," Marcus whispered. "Executive board. I heard they've called corporate." Elliot nodded. That wouldn't surprise him. "You're not alone, man," Marcus said, his voice low. "Everyone down here, maintenance, housekeeping, kitchen, we're all behind you. You gave us something none of us have had in years." "What's that?" Marcus looked him dead in the eye. "Proof that we matter." Upstairs in the boardroom, Veronica Hale stood at the head of the table, her face a mask of controlled fury. "This has gone far enough," she said, her voice clipped and cold. "Mr. Barnes's behavior, however well-intentioned, has created a disruptive narrative. We need to reassert control." Room shifted uncomfortably. One executive cleared his throat. "With respect, Veronica, the guest in question has not filed any complaint. In fact, she's praised his conduct publicly, and bookings have increased 12% since yesterday." Another added, looking at a report. We're receiving emails from international clients asking if Mr. Barnes still works here. Veronica's lips thinned into a hard line. We cannot run a luxury establishment on sentiment. Just then, the boardroom door opened. Raina Saito stepped in. Without a word, she walked to the center of the room and placed her phone on the table. A recording began to play. Veronica's voice from the lobby, sharp and condescending. "This is America. If you want service here, you need to speak English. We don't have time for guessing games and silent treatment." Silence. Raina turned off the recording and looked up, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of the executives. "I gave you a chance to correct the record," she said evenly. "You chose to pretend nothing happened. And you recorded that without my consent." Veronica stammered. "You were in a public space," Raina replied, her voice unshakable, surrounded by witnesses. "I came here to evaluate this hotel as a long-term partner for our tech summit. What I found was a culture of assumption, and one man brave enough to speak humanity into a room full of protocol." She paused, letting her words land. "I will not cancel the summit, but I will attach my company's name only to institutions that recognize value beyond a title." She then looked directly at Veronica and delivered the final, devastating blow. Elliot Barnes is that standard. NNTHE ballroom at the Royal Grand had never been this full. Not for holiday galas, not for celebrity weddings, and certainly not for a press conference called by a billionaire who refused to say why. Backstage, Elliot adjusted the stiff collar of his shirt. He wasn't here to play a role. He was here because Raina had asked him one simple question that morning. "Will you stand beside me, not as a symbol, but as yourself?" Now, she stood beside him, as calm as ever. "You don't need to speak," she said quietly. "I want to," he replied. Raina walked to the podium, bowed deeply to the surprised crowd, and then stepped aside. Elliot walked up, a man in work shoes, standing under hot lights. "My name is Elliot Barnes," he said, his voice steady. "I clean floors for a living. Yesterday, I watched someone powerful get dismissed because she refused to perform on someone else's terms. I've been on that end of things. I didn't step forward because I was brave. I stepped forward because I recognized the look in her eyes. The look we get when the world tells us we don't belong in rooms we paid to enter." A hush fell over the room. "I didn't offer a statement," he said. "I offered a cup of tea. I spoke her language not to impress her, but to remind her she wasn't alone." He looked over at Raina. "And in return, she reminded me I still had a voice." Raina stepped forward once more, her voice clear and carrying. This time, she spoke in flawless English. "I have done 100 interviews in my career," she began. "Every time, I am expected to smile, to pitch, to please. But not today." She scanned the room. "Today, I am not here as a CEO. I am here as a woman who watched a man with a mop do what a room full of experts could not." Her voice didn't rise, but it carried like thunder wrapped in silk. "He didn't see a language barrier. He saw me." NSHE paused, then held up a small photo, the now famous image of Elliot bowing slightly as he offered her tea. "This photo has been shared over 12 million times," she said. "But what matters isn't the image. It's what you didn't see." She looked directly at the reporters. "You didn't see the smirks, the dismissals, the measured cruelty wrapped in customer service smiles. You didn't see how many people rolled their eyes when I chose silence." She lowered the photo. "And you didn't see Elliot's hand tremble when he bowed, because it didn't. He met my silence with strength, not fear. That is the kind of leadership I want in every boardroom I walk into." An applause broke out this time, louder, spreading like a tide. Raina waited until it softened, then looked out once more. "There's one last thing I'd like to share," she said. She turned slightly, looking at Elliot. "Mr. Barnes, would you allow me to read something? NHE nodded, unsure. She reached into her pocket and unfolded a piece of paper. His letter to Charlotte and Charlotte, she began, her voice now soft, intimate. One day you'll be old enough to ask me not just what I did, but why I did it. We don't need the world's permission to do what's right. We just need the will to do it anyway. And a silence fell over the room that no one dared break. Elliot's chest tightened, his own words now echoing back to him as a testament to a truth he had almost forgotten. The press conference ended not with a slogan, but with two people bowing to each other on a stage. And in that room of power suits and camera flashes, dignity stood taller than branding. And hours later, in a small cafe 2 blocks from the hotel, Elliot and Raina sat side by side. No cameras, no audience, just tea. You didn't have to let me read that letter, she said quietly. I know, he said, but maybe the world needed to know I'm not just a janitor. You never were, she said. You just stopped correcting them. The elevator inside Whitaker Tower, Raina's corporate headquarters, barely made a sound as it ascended. Elliot stood alone inside, his reflection multiplying in the mirrored walls. He'd swapped his usual work shirt for a clean button-up and an old corduroy jacket that still smelled faintly of his wife's favorite cologne. He hadn't worn it in years. NNTHE doors opened to a world of glass, chrome, and silence. Raina was waiting in a private conference room, backlit by a wall of windows that overlooked half the city. She didn't rise when he entered. You asked to see me, she said, her hands folded on the table. Elliot nodded, taking a seat. I figured if you're going to put your name on me, you should at least know mine. He took a breath. My name is Elliot Barnes, former linguistics teacher, father, widower, current janitor and temporary internet meme. NNSHE didn't laugh. A flicker of something unreadable crossed her face. I know what they're saying, she said, her voice clipped. I've heard the backlash. The board is watching me like a malfunctioning asset. Is that what you think this is? He asked. A brand crisis? No, she said flatly, her gaze intense. I think it's a mirror. People didn't applaud because I said something profound. They applauded because you did something inconveniently decent. You reminded them of a humanity they've learned to ignore, and that scares them. Elliot met her gaze. No, she corrected. That shames them. They sat in silence. Then Raina broke it, her voice dropping half an octave. There's something I haven't told anyone. I was 6 the first time I refused to speak. I was sent to an elite prep school in Tokyo. I didn't understand a word, and every time I opened my mouth, I heard my difference echo back at me. The teachers praised my silence, called it discipline, but really, I just stopped trying. She looked down. That silence followed me to Harvard, to boardrooms, to bedrooms. I learned to use it as armor. But armor gets heavy, Elliot said gently. NNSHE nodded, a look of profound loneliness on her face. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Because she looked up, her eyes soft. I think I remember your wife. NHI's heart skipped a beat. What? Years ago. She used to teach English at the community center on Mott Street, right? Elliot blinked, stunned. Yes. I was 19, alone, just arrived from Japan, Raina said. No confidence, barely any vocabulary. I was placed in her class. Elliot's throat tightened. She wore cherry blossom earrings, and she never, ever made me feel stupid. She smiled faintly. She asked us once to write a letter to our future selves. I wrote, one day, I want to be a woman who speaks truth without needing volume. She looked at him. You were married to her. She changed my life, Raina said quietly, but I never got to thank her. Leukemia, Elliot whispered, 6 months from diagnosis. A long, heavy silence stretched between them, a shared space of grief. She would be proud of you, Raina said finally, of what you did, of who you are. I'm not sure I've lived up to that. You have, she insisted. You lived long enough to echo her impact. NTHAT stopped him cold. Because it was true. As he left Whitaker Tower, Raina walked him to the elevator. At the door, she hesitated, then spoke, her voice back to its usual, careful business tone, but with a new undercurrent of warmth. "I want to offer you a job," she said. "Not as a janitor, as a consultant for my company, for internal ethics and communication training. You understand what real dignity looks like. I want that in my company." NNHE blinked, the offer so far outside the realm of his current reality that it didn't compute at first. "Are you serious?" "Anne, I am rarely anything else," she replied. "And I'll think about it," he said, the words feeling inadequate. "And I hope you do," she said. As the elevator doors began to close, she added softly, "Tell Charlotte her mother was unforgettable." NNTHE doors sealed shut, and Elliot stood alone, descending in the silent, mirrored box. Only this time, he didn't feel like he was going down. He felt like he was rising. NNTHAT evening. Back in his modest apartment, Elliot opened a drawer he hadn't touched in years. Inside was an old, creased envelope. His wife Emma's letter to their daughter, written in the final weeks of her illness. A letter he was supposed to give Charlotte when she was older. He unfolded it, his hands trembling slightly as he read the familiar words. "My dearest Charlotte, when you read this, I will be in the sky." NNHE pressed the letter to his chest, then slowly reached for a pen. He turned the paper over and, on the back of his wife's last words, he began to write his own. NNTHE, wind whispered through the Whitaker courtyard, rattling the leaves like pages being turned. Elliot stood beneath a cherry tree, holding Charlotte's backpack. Today was her first official speech therapy session. Inside the towering glass building, the world of power suits and polished words churned on, but Elliot was thinking about his daughter, his soft-spoken, fierce-eyed girl. "Nan, she's waiting for you," Raina said, stepping beside him. She wasn't in a blazer today, just a soft navy sweater, her hair in a low ponytail. She looked lighter. "She asked if you'd sit in." She added, "Nay me?" He blinked. "Nen." She said, "Dad talks like the sky listens." I figured that meant something. Elliot smiled. "She always says things sideways, but they land right where they need to." They entered the small therapy room. It wasn't clinical. It was warm, with rugs, beanbags, and books arranged like rainbow spines on low shelves. Charlotte sat cross-legged on the floor, her fingers wrapped around a plush rabbit. Raina sat quietly in the corner, more mother now than mogul in NDR. Alan, the speech therapist, smiled gently. "Hi, Charlotte. Do you want to try again today?" Charlotte looked up at Elliot. He nodded. "Only if you want to, sweetheart." A beat passed, and then she whispered something almost inaudible. "Okay." Nye. THE room held its breath. Dr. Allen smiled. "Let's play the color game. I'll hold up a card, and you name the color when you're ready." One by one, the cards appeared. Red, green, yellow. Charlotte remained silent. But then came the blue card. Charlotte blinked, and softly, so softly it was almost a thought, the word came. Sky. Not blue. Sky and Elliot felt his lungs forget how to work. Raina's eyes shone. That's right," the therapist said gently. "The sky is blue." Charlotte didn't answer. Instead, she turned her small, serious face toward Raina and whispered, "I saw you cry." Raina froze. The air in the room went still. Charlotte tilted her head. "You were holding the locket." Elliot tensed, and Raina's voice was a whisper. "Yes, I was. My mom had one too," Charlotte said. "But hers was broken." And Raina's voice shook. "Did it have cherry blossoms on it?" Charlotte nodded. Raina looked at Elliot, her eyes wide with a question he couldn't answer. "She gave it to me when I was little," Charlotte added, her voice gaining a strange clarity. "She said, when people miss each other, the flowers remember." NNTHE room held still, as if afraid any sound might snap the fragile, impossible moment. Raina rose and knelt beside Charlotte. "Your mother," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "was my teacher a long time ago. I didn't know you were her daughter until recently." Charlotte blinked. "Did she teach you words?" "No," Raina said, a tear finally tracing a path down her cheek. "She taught me silence, the kind that holds meaning. I miss her." Charlotte whispered, and Raina reached into her own pocket and pulled out her locket. Slowly, she opened it. Inside was a faded photo of Elliot's wife, Emma, her warm, familiar smile beaming out. Charlotte gasped. "I have the other half," she said. Elliot sank into a chair, the full weight of the memory hitting him. Emma had given him half of the locket before she passed, telling him one day someone would return the other piece. He had thought it was a fever dream. Charlotte reached into her backpack, pulled out her own broken locket, and handed it to Raina. The two halves clicked together with a soft, definitive sound, a whisper of destiny in the quiet therapy room. That night, Raina invited them over, not to her sterile penthouse, but to her real home, a modest, craftsman-style house tucked away in a quiet corner of the city, shaded by sycamore trees. She opened the door herself, barefoot, a soft sweater replacing her usual blazer. "No staff," she said with a small smile. "Just us." Elliot noticed the walls were bare, not cold, but waiting. "You don't have any pictures," Charlotte observed with a child's simple honesty. Raina paused, then looked at the empty walls as if seeing them for the first time. "I used to think silence meant strength," she said quietly. "But now I think maybe I was just afraid of echoes." "Then let's make new ones," Elliot said softly. And over dinner, the conversation flowed, easy and real. They talked about favorite childhood books, about words they liked and couldn't explain why. Elliot told the story of how he once sang a lullaby to a young Charlotte during a power outage and ended up being recorded by a neighbor and briefly becoming a local meme. She fell asleep halfway through. He chuckled. "I wasn't sleeping," Charlotte said, her voice small but clear from across the table. "I just didn't want it to stop." And THAT silenced everyone for all the right reasons. Raina looked at Elliot, her eyes shining in the candlelight. "You know," she said softly, "when I lost my voice as a child, it didn't happen overnight. It chipped away, piece by piece, until silence felt safer than being misunderstood." He nodded, understanding completely. "Now," she met his eyes, "I think maybe healing doesn't always look like sound. Sometimes it looks like being heard." NNHE reached for her hand across the table. She didn't pull away. Later, as he tucked Charlotte into the guest bed, she looked up at him. "Dad?" "Yeah. Love? Do you think Mommy can see us right now?" Elliot smiled gently. "I think she never stopped." Charlotte curled into her pillow. "Then, I hope she sees I gave her locket back. I think it was waiting for Miss Raina." NHE kissed her forehead. "I think you're right." "Dad?" "Yes. Do you think Raina could be part of our family one day?" Elliot paused, then whispered, "Sometimes, sweetheart, families are built from pieces that remember where they belong." Charlotte smiled with her eyes closed. "Like cherry blossoms," she whispered. "Exactly like that." Outside, Raina stood by the window, staring at the stars. Elliot joined her. "You okay?" he asked. NNSHE nodded. "I haven't been this scared in years." He raised an eyebrow. "Scared," she confirmed, "of feeling something real and wanting to keep it." NHE took her hand again. "Then let's keep it slow," he said, "but not silent." NSHE smiled. Deal. That night, Raina invited them over, not to her sterile penthouse, but to her real home, a modest craftsman-style house tucked away in a quiet corner of the city, shaded by sycamore trees. She opened the door herself, barefoot, a soft sweater replacing her usual blazer. No staff, she said with a small smile. Just us. Elliot noticed the walls were bare, not cold, but waiting. You don't have any pictures, Charlotte observed with a child's simple honesty. Raina paused, then looked at the empty walls as if seeing them for the first time. I used to think silence meant strength, she said quietly, but now I think maybe I was just afraid of echoes. Then let's make new ones, Elliot said softly, and over dinner, the conversation flowed, easy and real. They talked about favorite childhood books, about words they liked and couldn't explain why. Elliot told the story of how he once sang a lullaby to a young Charlotte during a power outage and ended up being recorded by a neighbor and briefly becoming a local meme. She fell asleep halfway through. He chuckled. "Men, I wasn't sleeping," Charlotte said, her voice small but clear from across the table. "I just didn't want it to stop." NTHAT silenced everyone for all the right reasons. Raina looked at Elliot, her eyes shining in the candlelight. "You know," she said softly, "when I lost my voice as a child, it didn't happen overnight. It chipped away, piece by piece, until silence felt safer than being misunderstood." He nodded, understanding completely. "Now," she met his eyes, "I think maybe healing doesn't always look like sound. Sometimes it looks like being heard." NNHE reached for her hand across the table. She didn't pull away. Later, as he tucked Charlotte into the guest bed, she looked up at him. "Dad?" "Yeah, love?" "Do you think Mommy can see us right now?" Elliot smiled gently. "I think she never stopped." Charlotte curled into her pillow. "Then I hope she sees I gave her locket back. I think it was waiting for Miss Raina." NHE kissed her forehead. "I think you're right." "Dad?" "Yes?" "Do you think Raina could be part of our family one day?" Elliot paused, then whispered, "Sometimes, sweetheart, families are built from pieces that remember where they belong." Charlotte smiled with her eyes closed. "Like cherry blossoms," she whispered, "exactly like that." Outside, Raina stood by the window, staring at the stars. Elliot joined her. "You okay?" he asked. NNSHE nodded. "I haven't been this scared in years." He raised an eyebrow. "Scared," she confirmed, "of feeling something real." And wanting to keep it, NNHE took her hand again. "Then let's keep it slow," he said. "But not silent." NSHE smiled. "Deal." It was a quiet Saturday morning in early spring. The kind of morning where the world feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for something gentle to arrive. Raina stood barefoot in the sun-dappled kitchen of her now lived-in home, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. Elliot was at the stove, humming under his breath as he flipped pancakes. Badly. Charlotte sat on the counter, her legs swinging, sprinkling blueberries with surgical precision. "Careful," Elliot said, glancing at her. "That's pancake art. We're making memories here." Charlotte grinned. "I'm making a bunny. This one's your mama, Raina." Raina laughed softly. "Why does my pancake have bunny ears?" "Because you're the bravest," Charlotte replied with the authority only a child could muster. "And brave people have big ears for listening to scared hearts." Raina blinked. That one landed deep. Later that afternoon, they visited the park where it all began. This time, Raina brought a flower. She handed it to Charlotte as they sat beneath the blooming cherry blossom trees. "This is for you," Raina said, and Charlotte tilted her head. "Why?" "Because you reminded me that love isn't perfect," Raina said, her eyes meeting Elliot's over their daughter's head. "It's just patient." A few months later, on a cool evening in June, Raina, Elliot, and Charlotte stood together in a modest backyard filled with fairy lights and laughter. It wasn't a grand wedding, just a gathering of close friends. When Elliot turned to Raina to say his vows, his voice caught in, "You know," he said, For a woman who built a business empire, it took you long enough to let someone love you. NSHE raised an eyebrow, her smile soft. For a janitor with a mop and a heart of gold, you're surprisingly patient. They both laughed. Then Raina leaned in and whispered, "Thank you for never trying to fix me, just for standing still until I could find my way back." When they exchanged vows, they didn't promise perfection, they promised presence. They promised to speak the truth, even when their voices trembled, and to listen, even when there were no words. NNTHAT night, under the stars, Raina stood beside Elliot, watching Charlotte chase fireflies. "Did you ever think," she said, "that a spilled bucket in a hallway would lead to all this?" Elliot slipped an arm around her waist. "I've stopped being surprised by what happens when people choose to stay." NSHE leaned her head against his shoulder. They stood in silence. Not the heavy kind, but the kind that fills you up. And in that quiet, Raina finally understood. The deepest connections don't always need a voice. Sometimes, love is the language that speaks when everything else falls away. A janitor, a silent girl, and a woman who had forgotten how to feel had finally found their way home.